Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to our League of Women Voters Forum today. Just wanted to give some housekeeping announcements. This program is scheduled to run till 8 p.m. So the library is closed now. You'll have to exit out those double glass doors in that back driveway. Bathrooms are also in this back hallway that you're free to use during the program. This program is being recorded, so if you want to, watch it again afterwards in case you missed anything, it'll be on the library's YouTube channel. So that's youtube.com/Howell Carnegie District Library, or you can just search Howell Library in it. And for upcoming programs, you can visit the library's website at howelllibrary.org. So now I'll turn things over to Ellen Lafferty.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out on this miserable night. We appreciate it. It was hard driving here. My name is Ellen Lafferty, President of the League of Women Voters of Livingston County. And again, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you to the Howell Carnegie Library for being great supporters of the League and helping us put on this in-person/virtual program tonight. Let's see, if you want more information on our League, in the back table, if you sign in, you can sign up for our newsletter. And you'll find out on what's happening with the League. We don't sell or share your information, contact information. It's just for our newsletters and maybe a special mailings, but not often. If you're looking for ways to assist in the electoral process, consider becoming a poll worker. There's there's forms back there. And working at the polls, I don't know how many of our League members work at the polls, and it's the best way to experience the integrity of our elections. So I encourage you to grab a sheet and send it in. We welcome, you'll get paid, you'll get trained, and then you'll help the Livingston County community run really safe and secure elections. And speaking of elections, recordings of the candidate forums for the Howell mayoral, say that right, and the city council, as well as the Brighton City Council are on our webpage, and you can go to our YouTube channel through the links there, and you can see them both. We had a really nice evenings with them, good turnout, and hopefully you'll have a chance to look them over before you vote. You can also access them through our website, but also our online voting guide, which is vote411.org. Upcoming events in a month right here on October 17th. We're really excited to host Ramon Baca, the Livingston County Director of Veteran Services. Please share this with your friends. Ramon will explain the services available to veterans and how they can access those services and much, much more. Right, again, Meabon room here on Tuesday, October 17th at 7 p.m. Again, it's on our website. If you're not sure, you don't have to write this down. 1 month later, on Wednesday, November 29th, again, right here, we're going to be covering all the new and improved voting rights in place under Prop 2 of 2022. We're pleased to have the Howell City Clerk, Deanna Robson, plus possibly some other local clerks on hand to answer all of your questions. And the goal of this town hall is to provide you with the information you need to understand your new rights, and which are really going to go into place in 2024. I believe starting with the primary election in, whenever that is, February, March. I don't think it's been determined. And we're also pleased to host this educational evening for you. And those who are new to our public forums, we are proud to be nonpartisan, nonprofit. We neither support nor oppose candidates or political parties at any level of government. I just wanted to say we're bringing you this tonight because the National League has an online guide to public policy positions, and that's titled Impact on Issues. In this national publication, it states that one of the goals of social policy in the United States should be to promote self-sufficiency for individuals and families, and that the most effective social programs are those designed to prevent or reduce poverty. Access to energy efficient, environmentally sound transportation systems should afford better access to housing and jobs for our Livingston County residents. This is exactly why we're bringing this to you tonight. Everyone supports almost everyone, public transportation. With that in mind, we're proud to host tonight's program on the Let's Transportation System here in Livingston County. And I'm going to turn it over to our Educational Program Director, Claire Donovan.
Thank you, Ellen. This will be what, our fifth year of doing public education programs. And we really try to highlight some of the people that are working in government for us on a daily basis. We have the pleasure this evening of having the Director of Let's, Greg Kellogg, who is a homegrown Livingston County resident his whole life. Quite a pleasure and honor to have him in this position. And quite frankly, along with everybody else that we've met in the county, just a terrific employee and public servant for us. So really appreciate having him. If you have any questions tonight, would you please save them to the end of the program so that Greg can get through what he wants to share with us. So Greg, tell us a little bit about you and the Let's program. Thank you.
There we go. How's that? Okay. So a little bit about myself. As Claire said, I was born and raised in Livingston County with a few interludes. College took me out of the county for a couple of years. Graduated from Pinckney High School, class of 2003. Went to Eastern Michigan University, political science degree in 2011, and then my Master of Public Policy in 2014 from Michigan State. And Let's is personal to me. And I finished my background. I have three young boys, 10, 6, and 5, and my wife Summer. We live in Howell Township. And Let's, before I began working for Let's, I was familiar with it as the transportation program for my wife's two disabled brothers. One has cerebral palsy, the other has torsion dystonia. They've been using Let's their entire lives since the 80s, both CMH consumers, which is a big constituency of Let's, still is, always has been. So, you know, I getting a Master of Public Policy, I kind of envisioned myself in Lansing or Washington, and then when I graduated, I realized I'd rather stay close to home, and the local government appealed to me too. So I started at the county in 2014 as an intern in the finance department. At that time, the Let's director was looking for his first deputy director. Things had grown and grown more complicated with finances and the multiple grants that we received, that he needed some help. So I was in the right place at the right time, applied and was awarded that position. And I worked as deputy director at Let's for 4 years, primarily in grants management, which I continue to do a lot of. Enjoy that aspect a lot, as well as the planning, which is, you know, most directors have a long view that they need to take, and that's something I spend a lot of time on too. And I'll get into our transit master plan we completed in 2019. So that's sort of how I became acquainted with Let's and how I got to Let's. I've been director now since 2018. A lot of growth has happened over that time period. I was our 40th employee in 2014 when I started. We now have 74 employees, so we've grown considerably. And in that time, gone from roughly a $2.5 million budget to a $4 million operating budget. So we've expanded. A lot of it is came with the growth in federal funds, and I'll sort of, I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'll get into the funding. So the way I structured this is I'll give you a brief overview of what Let's does, and then a little bit of history. And then I purposely put the funding towards the front of the presentation while everybody's still somewhat awake. And then I'll finish with several slides on the transit master plan and its recommendations and what we've done to implement those. What does Let's do? We are primarily an advanced reservation transit system. Although in the last couple of years with the new technology we have, we're able to accommodate a lot of on-demand requests. That includes calls or using our mobile app, which is called Let's Go. So we still do not operate any fixed route service, which is your typical, your city routes with designated stops, designated times. Although we are planning for one eventually, and I'll talk about that. We do regional service to surrounding counties. Primarily, we're an in-county, county-wide system. I want to emphasize that Let's is, there's been an impression forever that we only serve a certain segment of the population, folks with disabilities or senior citizens. And while that is true, they are our core customer. We serve everybody, anybody that needs a ride. And we've seen the general ridership increase in the last couple of years. I think everybody's probably familiar with the younger generation not as attached to their personal cars as I was, as we were. So we've seen a lot of growth from that demographic. We do healthcare transportation. We have the Michigan Flyer airport shuttle that departs from Meyer and Brighton. You may be familiar with that, but don't know that it's associated with Let's. It operates under contract with Let's. We just don't really publicize that. Everybody knows the name, so we just left it alone. We have a partnership with People's Express out of Whitmore Lake. They supplement our service in the southeastern portion of the county, Green Oak Township. And we also have some dedicated services with 3 of our townships, Hamburg, Putnam, and Unadilla. And then we also do, as needed at request, event shuttles, primarily the big ones that Balloon Fest, Melon Fest, and we've done lots of pop-up events such as the memorial wall that was at the airport, and then just any big event that comes to town. We always offer up our services just to relieve the parking situation. Again, we have 74 employees. I say 34 plus transit vehicles. We have several spares, but our core service is provided with 34. And at any given time, there's usually roughly 30 on the road. We have a big service area, 568 square miles. That is the entire county, plus our regional service to really any surrounding county. We mostly go to Ann Arbor. We're there every day, sometimes several times a day. But we also go to Lansing, Flint, and Novi quite a bit to Providence Park for medical appointments. And our current building was constructed in '99. Little bit of history. So we were established in October of 1977 through this intergovernmental agreement between the Board of Commissioners and SEMTA, which is now known as SMART. That may surprise you if you didn't know that, because there's quite a distance and a difference between our systems. But they sort of had a group of rural counties that they passed funds to, or they helped secure federal and state funds, matched the funds. So that's how Let's was formed through an agreement with SEMTA. 3 small buses that were owned and maintained by SEMTA launched the service. And the 1977 operating budget to kick everything off was about $155,000. And I believe about 50,000 of that was subscription services. So your CMH, these organizations that would pay contract rates to have less service. That was matched dollar for dollar by SEMTA, and then the Board of Commissioners would put in the rest, whatever was needed. And the SEMTA money, it was primarily federal and state transportation dollars that funded SEMTA. And there's a few clippings there from the press. In 1982, Let's had sort of carried on as a small system, 3 or 4 buses. 1982, the county ran into some budgetary issues, and funding, the general fund funding was almost pulled. There was a millage attempt authorized by the Board of Commissioners. The goal was to replace the general fund dollars with millage dollars. That failed pretty miserably, as you can see from the clipping there. And then after that, Let's did actually suspend service for several months in 1982. But it didn't take long. The public let the board know that they weren't too pleased with that. And so an appropriation was made, and Let's resume service. Primarily though, throughout the 80s, it was really a CMH driven service. I'm not sure about the exact timing, but sometime in the late 80s, early 90s, it was expanded. But for a while after that millage attempt, it was primarily CMH utilizing Let's. 1992, the county determined that there was no longer a benefit to being involved in SMART. Originally, they had matched the provided matching funds. And again, they owned and maintained Let's vehicles. But I'm not sure exactly why. I could not find in these old clippings exactly why that was the case. But it just got to the point, I think, that SMART was too, or something at that time was too focused on the Detroit region, and it wasn't really benefiting Livingston County staying attached to SMART. So the board dissolved that relationship, and the county applied for funding directly with MDOT. And I'll talk more about that in the funding section. And then the big change, what really spurred a lot of growth in Let's in the last 20 years, was the 2000 census. And after the 2000 census, our population in our core urban area, essentially the Grand River corridor, surpassed the threshold that the Federal Transit Administration deemed to be an urban area. So at that time, Let's was designated a small urban, and what that did is it opened up a direct line of federal funding, and that continues to this day. That's how we're classified as a small urban. I believe it's after over 100,000 population in the urban areas when you're designated a small urban. And the implication for that is that your funding is apportioned based on population and density. So you're getting direct funding from Congress, as opposed to prior to 2003. And by the way, that arrangement didn't start until 2003. There was a little delay after the 2000 census. Prior to that, we received only rural transportation dollars, which is just a much lower reimbursement rate. It's somewhere around 50% of expenses, as opposed to 50% fed and state, as opposed to what we receive now is about 85% of our expenses covered by federal and state grants. So that was a big deal. Take a quick drink of water here. So this is our annual ridership from that time in 2003. I don't have good data going back before 2003, but I think it was typically in the 20 to 40,000 range in the 90s. You can see that ridership increased significantly throughout the 2000s and the teens. I can tell you that those spikes in 15 and 16, I was there for them. They were a few big event shuttles that we did that sort of skewed our numbers those years. One was the air show at the airport that they haven't done since then. So really, if you put a trend line through it, it would kind of be a linear upward trajectory through 2019. And then we all know what happened the following year in 2020. As you can see, ridership really declined, and we're still recovering from that. A lot of our core ridership has returned. The folks that we call transit dependent, who rely on us or don't, have few other options besides Let's, have returned. A lot of the riders of choice, I think, and then some of the events I mentioned have not come back as strong yet. So, but looking at this next slide, I believe it's the next one. This is monthly ridership from January of 19 through actually August last month. And you can see that that we're approaching. So our average pre-COVID was about 12,000 trips a month, and we're approaching that level again. We surpassed that in August. So happily, we're on the upswing again. And this comes out of our transit master plan. This is our service distribution. So you can see the sort of the concentration of Let's trips by township, and then on that plot on the right side, the bigger the dot, the more trips are served in that area. And those can be origins or destinations. So as you can see, it's pretty well distributed along Grand River. It is, I think, slightly in the eastern half of the county towards Brighton. I think we're doing a little bit more service over there as opposed to the western half of the county, which gets into, you can see this was prepared actually for the potential facility, the proposal for a new facility in Brighton. And that's the reason, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on, but the our current facility is the star on the map in Howell Township, kind of by the 96 sign there. As you can see, we're not located, our location was chosen for convenience. We're on county airport property. It's not ideally situated to serve the entire county. So if you've heard those conversations, that's why they began, is just to sort of to have a satellite on the east side of the county and to serve more efficiently. And trip purposes. So why do people ride Let's? May surprise you, it may not. This is, it actually has ticked up in recent years, the share of folks that use us to get to work. And these are, I do need to, in full disclosure, these are self-reported trip purposes. So the passengers tell our dispatchers. Our dispatchers always ask, and so they report their purpose, but probably not 100% accurate, but it gives you an idea what folks are using us for. Okay, and now to the fun part, funding. So at this time, after 2003, when we began receiving federal funds directly, this general picture has been the case for the last 20 years or so. About roughly half of our operating funds come from federal transportation grants, specifically urban area formula funds that were apportioned by Congress. And then about 35% comes from state local bus operating. And that is the source for those state funds is the Michigan Transportation Fund, which is funded by our motor vehicle taxes. It's actually the same pot of money as that roads are funded from, but there's a another fund within the MTF for transit. And I can tell you that statutorily, so Act 51 of 1951 is what actually put transit funding into law. The law states that agencies our size are supposed to receive 44% of operating expenses. I've never seen it above 40. We did get a significant increase for this upcoming fiscal year in the 2024 budget. But generally, the state gives us 35 to 40% of our total expenses. Passenger fares are the light brown color, and then similar to fares but different in an important way, service contracts. So service contracts, the dark brown, can be used to match grants. Passenger fares cannot be used to match grants. And that's an important part of what allows LETS to grow and what restrains LETS is having local dollars to match our grants. For several years, 5 years ago, before the board started appropriating money to LETS, we carried forward about $500,000 in federal funding each year that we couldn't match. We didn't lose it, we carried it forward, but it just kept going forward because we didn't have enough local dollars to match the grants. Passenger fares, again, they have to be deducted before we take that federal 50%. So the perennial question when, whether it be commissioners or just the public as well, why don't you raise fares to increase service or to enhance service? Because that would essentially be putting more on the backs of our riders and taking burden off of the federal grants and putting it onto our riders. So, we could increase fares from, the average is 2 now. We could increase it to 5, but we'd have to deduct those fare revenues before we sought the federal reimbursement. So it's complicated, but just to let you know why LETS has not raised fares essentially since the beginning. I think sometime in the 80s, our fare went up from $1 to $2. And just to backtrack a little bit and explain what the fares are, it's $2 each time you cross a township. So within a township or to the adjacent township is $2 for the general public. If you're over 60 or have a disability, it's half, so $1. And those have remained unchanged since, like I said, about the 80s. So, which, there are passengers that have trouble affording that. So I've never been a proponent of raising fares. So what we're left to do then is generate other local sources of revenue. I'll get a little bit more into that, but the way I've done that, gone about it is new partnerships. There was you'll notice I mentioned the 1982 millage attempt. There was a half attempt a few years back where a former county commissioner introduced a millage, and it didn't make it out of committee. So I'm not considering that it never made it to the voters. So, but that's sort of any major growth would require a big influx of local dollars. And just to break down what the funding picture looked like, specifically this past fiscal year, we're on the federal state fiscal year, so it runs October through September. So it's just getting ready to end, and that's just sort of the detail behind that graph I showed you on the last page. Importantly, our capital needs, so any bus purchases, facility needs, even maintenance on buses is covered 100% by the federal and state grants. So what we need that local share for is the operating expenses, which I'm sure you can guess the most significant is salaries, driver salaries and fuel, things like that. Again, I'm going to sort of go through these quickly. I've gone over some of these things, but we're designated, our funding is designated for the South Lyon, Genoa, Hamburg urban area. Our funding is not given to Livingston County, it's given to that urban area, which looks like this. This is the change from 2010 to 2020. Each census, it's gotten larger. I think we all know that Livingston County is one of the fastest growing in the state. It has been for some time. But specifically the urban core is where it's growing the fastest. So between 10 and 20, we had some areas that used to belong to the Detroit urban area, actually added to ours. So there's been growth down here in Hamburg and Putnam, but we've also chipped off some of the Detroit urban area, I think because of the characteristics of the community. They kind of changed how they designated these areas and gave Heartland to us. So we were serving Heartland anyway, but now we're getting funding for it. So that's what our federal funding is based on. And then that table at the bottom shows you how that urban area population has changed since 2000. So it continues to grow, continues to get more dense. And beyond the 2020 census, we had a big influx of federal funding with the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the Infrastructure Bill. That increased our federal funding by about 40%. So we are we're well funded. I can tell you that a lot of that increase we've taken advantage of to use to replace vehicles. We can use it for either operating or capital, and we had a fleet that was aging, so we used a lot of it for capital, but we will probably be back in the same scenario of not being able to match it all in future years. And this just shows you our federal funding over time, the last 10 years, and the big jump in after the infrastructure bill going into 2022. Again, Act 51, I sort of went over this, but it's they 20% capital match for capital needs, or that 35 to 40% of our operating expenses. And that not only provides operating assistance for LETs, that's also what we pass through to People's Express for our partnership with them and Michigan Flyer. That's the only funding we provide to People's Express and Michigan Flyer is that state pass through. There's no local funds involved in those services. So back to local match. Why it's important again is that roughly every dollar of expenses we incur, 15 cents has to come from some local source. As I mentioned, fares can't be used. Our service contracts, which include partnership with the healthcare systems, CMH, the townships, that's all matchable funding. And then, as I said, about 5 years ago, the Board of Commissioners did start contributing general fund dollars. Started at $50,000, it's now $65,000 a year. And just to show you how far that goes, that generates an additional roughly $430,000 in state and federal funds. So a little bit of local funding goes a long way. So the Transit Master Plan. This was our first comprehensive transit plan for the county. There had been some smaller studies in the past, but this one sort of looked at all aspects of our transportation infrastructure. And this, I've been lucky that I've had this since becoming director, pretty much having a roadmap in front of me the whole time. We hired the transportation consulting firm AECom out of Southfield. They've worked on a lot of projects in Michigan and did a great job on this plan. So I'll go over the recommendations and then sort of tie in what we've done, and I think that'll give you an idea of what we've been working on and where we're going. So I'll give you a second to digest that while I take a drink here. So I'll go through each of these fairly quickly and just let you know where we stand, what we've done, and what has yet to be done. So the first thing was the Michigan Flyer service. Believe it or not, we in our public public forums that we had surveys that went out both online and in person at various events. The number one request out of those surveys was that. Michigan Flyer had been going from East Lansing through Ann Arbor to the airport since the 2000s, but never had a place to stop in Livingston, and they could not, without some sort of support from the county, they could not justify it to launch a new location. So what the plan sort of recommended and what we ended up doing is using that state subsidy to get it going. It's still not to the point where it could sustain without that, but it has been growing. We did about 7,300 trips this past year, which is about 20 a day. Still, if you look at the daily averages, it still hasn't recovered from pre-COVID. We were at about 30 a day in early 2020. And so it's ramping back up, but it's very popular. Usually as soon as somebody uses it once, then they'll quit driving to the airport. So it's real convenient. You just park your car at the Meyer in Brighton. For $2 a day, you can leave your car there if you don't have a ride. One of the things that we also started on immediately was diversifying our fleet. For many years, the biggest sort of complaint I heard from the public and also our board was empty buses. Why are these big buses driving around empty? Which, 5 minutes ago, they may have just dropped off a group of 30 people, but still, it's a valid point. So we've maintained a lot of the buses, but we've also diversified to include a lot of these vans that you'll see around. And just to show the changes we made, we're up to roughly half and half vans and buses. It was almost entirely buses when I first started back in 2014. Our trip management system. So we up through about 2020, our dispatchers placed all of our rides manually. So about 500 rides a day. They would take each individual ride and put it on a route. And I can't believe they did that at any time. They were great at it. They started with the core, recurring rides and then sort of built them out. But it was very inefficient. I think the worst part about it, they did great, but it would take so long to schedule a ride that folks would be on the phone for half an hour. And it was almost impossible to get through to Let's in the office because of that. And also it just was, prone to human error. We all make mistakes, and so things would happen. So we knew that there were programs out there. We just, to that point, hadn't really studied it or had the capacity to. So the master plan sort of put us in the direction of where we needed to look. So in 2021, right kind of in the trough of COVID, we implemented this software called EcoLane, and it does all the routing automatically. So what used to take 20 minutes, half an hour to schedule a ride now takes 5 minutes. So it made the scheduling process faster. It's usually more efficient. I know Ella will say that sometimes it's not. The struggle implementing this right in the depths of COVID was that ridership was very low, and then when it started to climb back up and take off, we had to make a lot of changes. There's a lot of adjustments that need to be made. So we've worked on that. We're trying to continue to refine it, but overall, it's been a huge improvement. And we have a lot of customer-facing features like trip notifications. I'll talk about the app in a minute. But in the old days, it was wait half an hour to talk to a dispatcher or don't get a ride. So a big impetus was just giving folks options, but also allowing, push notifications through your phone. We also have automated calls that go out the day before to remind passengers of their upcoming ride. And also electronic fares. You can pay right on the app with a credit card. And it just also provides us, I took a snapshot down there, a lot of real-time insights. So obviously we know late morning, 11 to noon, there's not a lot of availability. That bar graph shows obviously the red is where we're reaching our capacity, can't really accept any more rides, and green is where we have some capacity to spare. So it gives us a lot of real-time information that our dispatchers can use to make adjustments on the fly. And the mobile app. So this again was a product of that new software, and it's been very popular. It's a lot like in a lot of ways like Uber and Lyft. You get on there and you choose a time. There's some screenshots there, and certain times of day it'll tell you that a ride's not available, but really overall it's very user friendly, and we've had a big uptake among not only new folks that are attracted, but our existing ridership that decided that this is a better way for them to book trips. You can also track your bus on the app. The one or two stops before, I think it shows you on the map where the bus is located. So to show you how that's been received, the green bars on the bottom are the percent since January of last year when we launched the app. The green bars represent the mobile app bookings, and red is dispatcher bookings, folks that called into the office. And you can see that that's climbed, sort of peaked around 23.5, 24%. But I think that is mostly a product of our being back to at capacity at certain times a day. There's not a lot of times, there are a lot of times a day where it's hard to get a ride, but I'll talk about next year and increasing our capacity, which should help this. And the app, this is trip purpose for app bookings, sort of mirrors the overall trip purpose graph I showed you earlier, but even more so, it's a lot of people going to work, which that part doesn't surprise me. I know that we have a lot of young folks who would rather whip out their phone and use the app to get to work and things like that. So even school, we have kids that go to school and use the app to book their trips. Mostly a lot of the charter schools and the schools of choice that don't have public bus service or school bus service, I should say. Weekday service expansion. So again, we've struggled on and off with being, like I said, at capacity. We're sort of getting back to that point now. And not having a millage is, that's just the way that this county is. Again, I'm from here. I know the preferences of our citizens, or the majority of them. But that's sort of, we haven't had a consistent stream of local match. So the way we've gone about expanding service is to kind of go where the demand is, and that's township by township. So we've formed partnerships with the sort of a coalition of the willing, I guess. And a lot of these townships reached out to me. I don't go around calling them. It started with Hamburg. They requested more service, so they're actually they have a general fund appropriation, sort of like our board, that they give to LETS to match our grants. Same with Putnam and Unadilla. They share that bus, but it's dedicated to the township. It does leave the township when their residents need to go out of the township for appointments and so forth, but for the most part, it stays within those townships. And that I could see expanding considerably. I've had a few other townships reach out and ask for details on how that might work. So, and then weekend service. And I know a couple folks in the audience I've talked to a lot about weekend service, which was pretty much non-existent 10 years ago. We had a couple vehicles on Saturday. We had no Sunday service up until 2019. And so in 2019, we launched our first Sunday vehicle. We increased the number of vehicles on Saturday. Then we pulled them back when COVID hit. Thankfully, this year, it got to a point where we could justify increasing it again. And there's really, I can't see an end to the demand on the weekends. It seems to have really gone up the last couple of years, especially Sundays. Not sure if it's how much of it is church service or just folks wanting to go out. But I've been at board meetings where a lot of folks have come and spoke during public comment specifically about weekend service. And if you recall that graph I showed you from our software this was a couple Saturdays ago, there's a lot more red and orange on the weekend than there is on a given weekday, which tells you that we're booked up essentially. Sort of now having those metrics to go on, I can justify to our board and my budget request where we need to target additional drivers. And I have, I think, 4 or 5 additional drivers that I'm requesting for 2024, mostly to be targeted at the weekends. So we're in the middle of the county budget process. It's not finalized till December, but that is in the works. And then we also want to sort of target those busy times during the week too. So we just have a lot better information to go on than we used to as far as where those increases are needed. And if I didn't explain this, I at the top in the title, I said whether it's completed or ongoing. Most of these things are ongoing because we're seldom to a point where we can stop and say, okay, this is done. So except for I think Michigan Flyers, the only one I marked complete. Most of these are works in progress. And that includes this recommendation for community shuttles. We have one of those right now, and it's the healthcare van. We actually have 2 vans that are funded by all 3 healthcare systems. They go for any medical appointment. Anyone from the public can call us and request them. It could be pharmacy visit. It can be a doctor's appointment, physical therapy, really anything. So we're thankful that the health systems saw the value in that, and they actually that started in 2019 for a 3-year pilot, and they renewed their contribution last year. So you'll see those vans running around. We call it Rides to Wellness, and we also have a 3rd van that is dedicated for Trinity. Trinity has the biggest presence in the county, and they also have the only full hospital in the county. And that is mostly, if you see the Trinity shuttle out there, is mostly dedicated to ED discharges, emergency department discharges, and transfers to nursing facilities. So one thing we've really tried to do with that service is actively work with our county's EMS department. They were getting really bogged down in non-emergency calls. And we never really had a formal relationship with them until this came along. But we now actually work with them if they get a call that they think it's something that Let's can do. We'll work with them to take that ride. And I think everybody would appreciate, a more responsive ambulance service that's not taking someone to a doctor's appointment or discharging them from the hospital when they can walk out of the ambulance. So it's been a benefit in several ways. And this could be a model for other sectors with these community shuttles, but that is currently those are the only shuttles we run on a daily basis. Connections to out-of-county providers was one of the recommendations. We've just last month kicked off our first real, our first formal connection. We're surrounded again by these large transit systems that, for the most part, don't connect with LETs because we go directly into their jurisdictions. But MTA Flint, they've been taking employees from Flint down to manufacturing sites in Livingston since the late 90s. Been a hugely successful program, about 500 trips a day they're doing right now. But that serves only Brighton and Howell. And so through the chamber, the Howell Chamber, these manufacturing facilities in Fowlerville reached out and said, hey, we want some of that too. So that's when Let's got involved. Rather than have the MTA buses continue on to Fowlerville and do that on their own, the MTA bus was already passing Let's several times a day, so they now stop at our facility and we take a group of employees out to one particular manufacturer out there, and we're planning to expand that. It's gone very well in the last month. So yes, I mean, we'd prefer to have local labor, but it's just not there. I think the fact that that service has been around since the 90s is a testament to the local labor shortage for entry-level jobs. So I think it's a win-win for folks in Flint needing employment and for the manufacturers in here that need employees, and to keep, and obviously keep those manufacturers in our county instead of picking up and going elsewhere, which we've seen in recent years. So hopefully that continues to develop. We really won't have the capacity to do connections with other systems. You know, specifically Ann Arbor is probably the most requested connection, just because we don't have a good spot to do it. And that brings me to this recommendation, is for a new operations center and transit hub. I sort of went over the justification for that earlier. I marked this as in progress because we've been trying for federal funding for this for 4 years now. And each time I get a debrief from the FTA that tells us, you know, where we fell. Are we competitive? Are we not? The last 2 years, we've been ranked highly competitive at the top rating in each category. But again, this year we didn't get the award. And my sense is just that having to do with the demographics of the county, maybe you know, they're looking at the awards, they're targeting areas that have persistent poverty and things like that, which everybody here knows that we're not. So I don't know for sure that that's what's keeping us from getting awarded, but the next step, I think, to strengthen our application is probably looking for a piece of property beforehand. The grant we've been applying for, we've been looking for property and then building a building on that property. And the estimate in the master plan is about 10 million for that. So there's been discussion about getting that property first, and that would hopefully make us more competitive to get the facility funding. So still working on that. In the meantime, shortly after the transit master plan was completed, we said, well, let's see what we can find in Brighton that's not our own facility. And we, at that time, entered into agreement with Brighton Schools to park a couple buses there. That's now expanded to 4. So in the absence of our own facility, we're still parking vehicles there. It's just a lot more efficient, as you can imagine. You know, before this, our only option was to send vehicles from Howell Township to Brighton and then back to Howell Town. They just go back and forth all day. It's a lot more efficient when they can start and end their day in the area they're serving. So this has helped, but we're still hoping to have a permanent facility in the next few years. Grand River bus route, I can see I'm running out of time here. I'll review this briefly. So besides the facility, I'd say the largest unfulfilled recommendation in the master plan is a fixed bus route that I mentioned we've never had. Back in late 2019, early 2020, there was a lot of momentum behind this. I actually had one of our commissioners, now Representative Bob Bazat, was helping try to develop this. We're planning to approach some businesses along Grand River, see what people were willing to do as far as funding. Again, in the absence of a millage, it would have required a significant amount of local funding. So again, then a couple months later, the bottom dropped out. And I can tell you that still, this has sort of been on hold since then, because nationally, fixed route ridership is still down. Last I looked, it's still like 40% several years on from the pandemic. So while community transit services have recovered, as Let's has, fixed route ridership is still far below pre-COVID levels. Some of that may never come back. As you know, the remote work has really taken off. I utilize that myself sometimes, since I mostly work at a desk behind a computer. But I'm optimistic we'll get back to this. It's the density. You can see the density shown on the map there. Darker colors, higher density. I think Grand River will be able to support this eventually. The last thing I would want to do and put my weight behind or my support behind is launch a service at the wrong time and then have it fail. These services are very infrastructure intensive. You have to work with your local jurisdictions, private landowners to get right of ways for shelters and bus stops. So it's not something that you want to just throw out there if you're not confident that you're going to get the ridership. So as of the most recent development on this is at my budget presentation a few weeks ago for the 2024 budget, I was actually asked by a commissioner to get an updated cost proposal on this. And I think I have this. We actually had a separate service plan put together. So we were really rolling on this, and there was a lot of momentum. But the estimated local funding share that would be needed was $500,000 at the time annually. And as I said before, we kind of scrape we scrape by on those local funds. So it really would require a big infusion of local dollars. So, but nonetheless, I've been asked to update that number and see where we stand today. It could, and that was at the time we had a lot less federal funding. That big bump came a couple years ago. So we may be able to do more with federal funding, less local match, but it's still going to require a few $100,000 to get that going. So these were included in the plan. They're not really in Letz's purview, but I'll mention them anyway. Countywide bike, non-motorized connections. Our county planning has done a lot on that. So making progress there. The reason these were included, and then the sidewalk network, and that's kind of an old flip I've been using for a while, but sidewalks and non-motorized paths, if you go around to successful fixed routes, that's how people who don't have cars get to the fixed route. If it's not an urban area where there's a lot of housing right on the fixed route, especially in Livingston, you'd need to get several blocks from, say in Howell, to get out there. So sidewalk connections and paths are sort of critical. And then this is the final recommendation, which is commuter service to Ann Arbor, and that's sort of just been put on hold. It's just one of those things we've had to drop on the priority list. There's still a lot of demand for it. But it's there's actually an existing People's Express route. If you know anybody or yourself need to get to Ann Arbor and you don't want to drive, People's Express I think has some room on that shuttle that they do daily. So But nonetheless, one of the recommendations was to actually have a Let's shuttle going back and forth. So just some other, this is my last slide, I believe. Something folks don't think about that we do a lot of. This is one example of how we support public safety. My deputy director is actually part of the emergency planning committee. He has a seat in the emergency operations center. And anytime there's an incident that requires a bus, whether moving people or keeping firefighters warm, they have a direct line to him, so he can get a bus dispatched. I think that was an incident last Christmas Eve in Howell Township, and we had, I think, like 20 drivers that volunteered on Christmas Eve to come out and do that. So just something that we do that is not publicized. So okay, I'm done. Questions? Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Sure. Yep. I'll repeat it. Would it be possible to get a copy of the slideshow? Absolutely. I will send that out. Ellen and Claire. Sure. Yep. A lot. Our policy is an hour, I believe. If it's, you can cancel up to an hour before, and then it won't be considered a no-show. I will say that that's one thing, one huge benefit of this technology. Our no-show rate has declined precipitously with all the alerts that we give now. But to answer your question, it's, so how, you asked how many, I mean, I'd say 5% maybe cancel within a couple hours. Oh, okay. That surprises me, frankly. And that could be a factor is cancellations, because this is all real time now. So you have folks canceling and then it opens up space. So. Mhm. Those were all fiscal years, actually. So October of 22 through this month. So I actually ran it as of today. So we're not quite at the end of the month, but that's this one. Yep. Sure. What hours do we operate, and do we have trouble getting qualified drivers? We are, I think our posted hours are 7 to 9 on the weekdays. We operate a little bit earlier than that for certain programs, but the general public is 7 to 9 on Monday through Friday. Saturday 7 to 5, and Sunday 7 to 4. And I hesitate because we've changed them quite a bit over the last couple of years coming out of not past 9, except for healthcare. We go till I think 11 for the specifically the Trinity shuttle, because they have discharges late sometimes. But yeah, I think we're at 9 o'clock is when we take the last ride. So meaning you can actually call up until 9. We're on the road usually till 10 though, carrying out trips that have already been booked. Do we have trouble getting qualified drivers? No. And we've been in much better shape than our peer agencies, especially in northern Michigan. They've had to do all kinds of crazy tricks to attract drivers. Getting taking seats out of buses so they could have a chauffeur license instead of a CDL. So we've had a consistent stream of applicants. We still do. I think we're full at this point, but whenever we post, we get at least a dozen or 2 dozen. So, yep, it's happily we haven't had that problem. Do we have a lot of rides being denied every year? Not. So the way we track that, it's difficult to distinguish between a ride that is truly denied, like we had nothing available in the 2 hours before, 2 hours after. If somebody calls and requests like a 2 o'clock pickup for an appointment, we try to work with that passenger. So can you go an hour before? Can you go an hour after? I mean, we try to close in on that time they request. So tracking that is hard because, is that truly a denial if we actually place somebody, but it wasn't the exact time they wanted? The total, actually, we call them refusals when we can't get, when we offer a time and the passenger says, no, I don't want it. If it's too far in advance, too far before, those refusals are very minimal. And then I think the most frequent type of denial would be a time of day when we're not operating. So, somebody calls and wants a ride at 9:30. Well, we're closed, or at, at 5 o'clock on Sunday, we're closed. So, but it's actually the denials, the refusals have increased as we've gotten busier. But we've been able to accept most rides. So. Sure. Mhm. Yep. Yeah, we are. That's asking about the graph that I showed that showed a lot of red and orange bars, meaning we're at or close to capacity. Those are that's a general overview, but that's all of our 30 routes combined. So there's usually a place to put them. I mean, it's not, again, it depends on if you're trying to meet their exact request or if they can be flexible. You saw there was some green and orange interspersed. So, maybe an hour earlier, we can get them there, or an hour later. So, but in general, you're right. There's not a lot of capacity right now. Go ahead. Thank you for listening, everyone. Sure, I can give my contact info to you. All questions since I rambled.